everybody, and happy spring. It is officially spring here, which means that it is past time for me to tell you about my January-February reading and take you through the kinds of things that I'm planning to read in the springtime months. So as you all know, I have been in a reading slump for honestly approximately 2 years now. And this is why I kind of laugh when I see people online who are like, oh, I'm in such a reading slump. I haven't read very much for the last 2 weeks. And I'm like, oh, boy, would it be nice for that to be the kind of reading slump that I've been in. And I'm slowly but surely getting out of that reading slump. But it is taking some time. So these were the books that I had on my TBR for January and February. And these are the books that I read. So it was better than nothing because I was able to finish one book, and I'm almost finished with this one. But it wasn't the greatest reading month in terms of number of pages, number of books, hitting my reading goal, nor was it honestly the greatest month in terms of the actual books themselves. So I started the year with this book. This is called Elsewhere by Alexis Schaitkin, and I chose this book as my choice for the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge 2025. This has a really interesting last sentence, and one of the prompts this year was a book that you chose to read based on its final sentence or final line. It's sort of lightly dystopian. I saw it being described as a dystopia, and I thought that would be a bigger aspect of it, but it's kind of realistic fiction with a slight sort of surreal, unusual, small-town dystopia vibe. Basically, the element of it that is categorized as dystopia is that this is a small town completely disconnected from the outside world, which they call Elsewhere. And in this small town, every year there are a couple of women who are mothers who disappear. So they go to bed one day, and then the next morning everybody wakes up, they're no longer there. There's no trace that they packed up their stuff and left. Everything is exactly as they left it. They're just gone. And that's not something that I would necessarily have wanted to be completely sort of solved. But it was something that I thought would be approached in a different way in this story. I would still recommend this book. I rated it at 3.5 stars, and I will say there were points of this book that were higher, that were more like 3.75 or even 4 stars at its best moments. I think what caused me to land on a 3.5 star review was that I was going to rate it after I finished it on Goodreads, which does not allow partial star reviews. And I was thinking of landing on a 3.75. But I realized that because it doesn't allow partial star reviews, I would have to give it a 4. And I just could not give it a 4-star rating, which means it probably wasn't actually a 3.7 star read to begin with. So I would still recommend giving it a try, especially not even if you like dystopian fiction, but specifically if you like female-led literary fiction. The issues I had with it were mainly I did not find the focus character particularly likable or particularly special, so I wasn't really interested in following her, and I also didn't think that she had enough agency in the transitions that she went through in the story. So there were a number of places where she had a really crucial moment where something changed or a decision was made, and it still felt to me like she was just drifting, and it didn't matter so much what was happening to her. So yeah, ultimately it was also a very slow-paced read, and as someone who was clawing my way out of a reading slump, I think I needed something that moved a little faster, because I was reading slowly, so it took this already very slow-paced book and meant that I was moving through it at an absolutely just glacial pace, which did not do it any favors. So yeah, 3.5 star read. It was fine. It wasn't everything I wanted it to be. So it was kind of a slow start to 2025. So then the second book that I read, which I am actually still reading, I only have a few dozen pages left, was a dud as well, but it was also kind of a dud that I was expecting. This is the book that I picked off my shelf specifically because I thought I was going to unhaul it or give it away. And that is Blair Witch: The Secret Confession of Rustin Parr. Again, was not expecting wonders out of this, and wonders is not what I received. And I think part of it is it's not scary. It's not scary at all, and I'm not sure that that's entirely the fault of the book, because I watched the movie The Blair Witch Project for the first time in preparation to read this book, and well, let's just roll some footage that sort of encapsulates what I thought about that. Welcome to my blanket nest. We are going to have a movie night tonight, and our movie is going to be The Blair Witch Project. I mentioned in an earlier video that I was going to watch this because my next book, which I have over here, is a Blair Witch spin-off novel. And I figured since I haven't seen the movie before, I should make at least like a token effort to watch it so that I will have any context for what I'm going to read now that I'm going to be starting this book. I mentioned this before. I don't even know why I own this book. I probably, if I had to guess, probably heard about the Blair Witch Project when it came out way back in 1999, which is so much earlier than I thought it came out. I thought it came out in like 2008, but it was 1999, so probably teenage me heard about it, heard that it was set in Maryland and filmed in Maryland, and decided that I would probably like it, and so I got the book. But I didn't even really, I wasn't interested in horror at all back then, and I'm not really that like excited about horror now. So I figure this is probably a book that I'm going to end up unhauling and giving away to a little free library, but at least we can have a scary movie night and get that out of it. So I have my blanket nest. Of course I waited until like 9 p.m. to watch this. I don't know why I do this to myself. I could have nightmares tonight, who knows? Or I could find it not scary at all. It is from 1999, and the concept of this like found footage has been done probably much more expertly at this point. But you know, it's a classic, and classics are classics for a reason. If I do get really scared though, I did bring out my life-size Elmo, so I can always snuggle him if I get really scared. Yes, I'm in my mid-30s and I still have this life-size Elmo that I got probably when I was 11. He's good to snuggle. He's like a big weighted blanket. And you know, if you're gonna watch a scary movie, he's a good companion. So I'm going to turn all the lights off, and I'm going to get cozy in my blanket nest and possibly traumatize myself right before bed and just have a good Saturday night. I haven't even started the actual movie yet, and I'm already pausing to say that I think perhaps actually the biggest risk of watching this, especially sitting so close to the TV, is going to be motion sickness. Even just like the sort of camera wobble as I'm sitting here watching the DVD scrolling menu. I was like, oh my gosh. So hopefully that's not a problem I have either. Does this movie not have subtitles? I can't understand what they're saying because it's ambient audio. Great. Doing great. What the hell do you mean that was the whole movie? What do you mean that's where it ends? What? What? Okay, so yes, was the sort of hyper-realism probably really innovative back in 1999? Yes. Was it, you know, narratively cohesive as a thriller? Yes. Was it scary? Not even for me, and I'm pretty easily scared. So I actually feel like reading this book, whatever is in it, might actually have more context than what I just watched. It was fine. It was a fine movie. It was okay. So rather than focus on anything related to the real-time events of the movie The Blair Witch Project, which takes place in like 1998, 1999, the present day at the time that it was made, this book chooses to focus on this killer that is mentioned for about 3 seconds at the beginning of the movie. They mention a guy named Rustin Parr who is said to have killed like 7 or 8 children in his remote home in the woods outside Burkittsville in like 1941. Again, not a figure that appears in the movie at all. He's just mentioned. It's insinuated that maybe the Blair Witch like possessed him or had something to do with that, but again, not really talked about. That's the angle that this book chose to take. And I think the other issue, besides the fact that it wasn't scary, was that it took such a weird angle to getting to this story. Rather than tell it from Rustin Parr's perspective in 1941, or a victim's perspective, or even from a townsperson's perspective, this author chose to tell it from the perspective of a journal which was written by the priest who heard Rustin Parr's last confession before he was put to death for the murder of these children. But it's not even like a first person from the priest's perspective. It's the journal as found by an interviewer who did like a profile on this priest. So you've got the interviewer. He's trying to talk to this priest who's on his deathbed. He gets this journal. Through the journal, he reads the story of Rustin Parr. And what ends up happening for me as the reader is that now the story is just filtered through so many additional perspectives that it starts to kind of lose resonance, if it had any to begin with. The journal is the best part of the book because you get the most plot action, the most events, the most immediate first-person relevant information. But again, it's not scary and it doesn't really establish anything that makes the movie feel more significant. I think this author, D.A. Stern, is trying to do the same thing with the journal that the movie does with the found footage, which is to suggest that this is just something that we've stumbled upon. And he's leaving a lot of mystery the same way the movie does to evoke that sense of we'll never know what really happened. But in both cases, we really don't feel like we know anything that happened. And because it's so inconclusive, it's hard to justify how it matters. So I am going to probably be giving this book 2 stars when I rate it on Goodreads. The writing isn't bad, it's just a story told from an inexplicable angle about an intellectual property that I don't think has a lot of potential for extra story in it. And it doesn't succeed on a genre level in terms of like being a horror or a thriller. You just kind of, it's so matter of fact, you don't really feel any particular like emotion towards it is kind of where I'm landing with this. That does mean that I have 2 books from my January-February TBR that are still in play now in March, April, and May. I don't know if I'll prioritize all my March, April, and May books and then come back to these, or if I'll sort of intersperse them into my next set of choices. But in case you need a refresher, they are House of Salt and Sorrows by Aaron A. Craig, which is a young adult kind of fantasy, and Babel by R.F. Kuang, which is a dark academia fantasy. Probably one of my most anticipated books for the last couple years now. Part of me kind of wishes I'd started with it so I would have had a more exciting January, February, but it is such an intimidating read that I was worried if I was still in my reading slump I would not be able to get into it, and I really want to be in the right place in my heart and mind when I start this book. Now that it's a new season, that means that it is time for me to choose a new set of books. And for those who are uninitiated, this is how I am choosing my book selections for each season this year. There's 4 choices every season, and it is usually a mood read. A book that I'm thinking of unhauling, a book that I chose from a random little free library, and I can't like preview the little free library to find out if there's anything good in there, and then a book that fits a Pop Sugar Reading Challenge category. I've already started one of these books. I'm not very far in yet. It is my mood read, and it is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. If We Were Villains sounds like the perfect book for me. It is dark academia, so if this is the year that I get into dark academia, it'll be because of reading this and Babel. It's very Shakespeare themed. It's about a group of college seniors who are students of Shakespeare at a conservatory in the Midwest, and it's sort of a thriller, like almost a murder mystery, although I don't know how much of it is mystery. But basically you have these 7 students who are Shakespeare scholars, and it's about what happens to them during their senior year that culminates, and this is in the description, in one of them dying, one of them being killed. And it's from the perspective of the one who went to jail for the murder of his friend, and I'm guessing we'll sort of find out what really happened and what the dynamic really was. Already I can tell that the characters are going to be really interesting, which is the #1 way to get me into a book. I am loving the Shakespeare references. I don't know how anyone who doesn't have a background in Shakespeare is reading and loving this, not because I think it's the only interesting thing about the book, but because they're just referencing character after character. They're quoting Shakespeare all the time, and I feel like if you don't know anything about it, you would get really lost. But so far it's very good. I am hoping to start reading a little bit faster so that I can see what happens next. My Pop Sugar Reading Challenge category for the spring months ended up being a prompt from the 2015 Pop Sugar Challenge. This is like 2025, it's 10 years on. They said go back to the 2015 list and see what your favorite prompt is and choose a book from there. And actually my favorite prompt off that list was a prompt that they've recycled since then in, I believe, 2023, which was a book by an author with the same initials as you. I talked about this in my TBR video during Vlogmas, but the book that I'm picking for this is one I already started in 2023, which is Days Without End by Sebastian Barry. Both of us have SB initials. This book is a historical fiction. I read it about 50 pages of it in 2023, and then I had to give it back to the library, but I've been interested in it since then. It has this really beautiful writing style. It's Civil War era from the perspective of 2 teenage boys into young men who kind of get roped into fighting for the US in like the wars against the Native Americans, and then they end up in the Civil War. They have this kind of found family dynamic with each other. They're in love with each other, and there's this Native girl who ends up becoming like a daughter to them. Again, could be a really problematic dynamic because of all the issues inherent in 2 sort of soldiers from the American army just sort of taking this girl. So I can't remember if I got to the part where they deal with that and had any opinion on it. That's the main thing I think could sway this in any one direction or the other for me, but again, I remember it having gorgeous writing. So I'm gonna probably tackle this one after I finish If We Were Villains, just because it's also a library book, and I want to make sure that I get both of those done before they're due back. I went to the little free library of my choice to pick my next book, and here is some footage of me doing that. I chose my little free library for this really deliberately. I have a couple of little free libraries that are in my parents' neighborhood, and another one that is on my way to work every day. But I didn't want to go for any of those because I had been to them fairly recently and looked at the selection, and I knew that it didn't have anything really interesting in it. And of course the point of the challenge is you've got to choose the best of what is in that little free library, even if it's not interesting. But since I was already familiar with their selection, I thought maybe I would go for something else. I'm not sure if I've ever been to this one before, which is great because it means I have no idea what kind of books are going to be in it. So we're going to go ahead to that one and see what we can find. So here's the little free library after I've taken out the book I chose, and when I get home I'll show you what I got. So the book I found at that little free library is called Plain Song. It's by Kent Harif. This is another literary fiction, again set in the late 90s, which so is If We Were Villains and the Blair Witch book. It is, from what I understand from the back, kind of like a slice of life realistic literary fiction about a small town in Colorado, a fictional small town, and it's just sort of bringing together the stories of a bunch of different characters. So according to the back of the book, we have a high school girl who's gotten pregnant, we have a teacher, a pair of boys who are experiencing sort of family issues, and some farmers who are, I think, brothers who are just bachelors, and they're kind of keep to themselves, is what I understand. And it's just telling their stories in this small town. So this was the most interesting thing that I was able to find in there. I am interested in it. There's some good reviews for this book. There's someone who actually wrote a really good review of this book that partially convinced me to read it on Goodreads, and that same person also wrote a very complimentary review of this. So that's a point in its favor. Right now, the only thing from before reading it that I can think would prejudice me against it is that the dialogue does not have any kind of dialogue quotation marks, not even single quotations. It's just in there with the narration. I don't think it'll be confusing to tell when someone's speaking, but it is kind of frustrating to have nothing to delineate it. But this could be, depending on how I like the characters, a new favorite, or it could be unmemorable, and we'll see how that goes. If you've read this, let me know. The last thing that I thought I was sort of interested in this spring was short stories. I don't read a lot of short stories. I don't have a huge number of short story collections, but it seemed like a good time to just knock one of those out. And there were two on my shelves that I thought were likely unhauls. Not because I thought they wouldn't be good, just because either I thought they wouldn't be particularly memorable, or in the case of the one I'm holding in my hand, I kind of thought it was going to read a little young for me now that I'm over 30. And I got this, it's not necessarily only for high schoolers, but it has, you'll see when I show it, it has the feel of a high school young adult book. And this is Geektastic, Stories from the Nerd Herd, edited by Holly Black and Cecil Castellucci. This is stories about nerds. I think it's some fantasy, some realistic fiction, but it's got a bunch of interesting authors. It's got Cassandra Clare, John Green, Libba Bray, David Levithan. These are all really prominent young adult authors. Wendy Mass, Garth Nix, Scott Westerfeld, Sarah Zarr. And again, just stories about nerds. I think there could be some real gems in here. I'm not convinced, even if there are really good stories, that I'm going to want to still have it on my shelf. I'm trying to be very discerning in deciding whether to unhaul something, because I have so many books. I have more books than fit on my shelves right now, and a lot of these are books that have been on my shelf for a decade or even 2 decades, and I've never gotten around to reading them or rereading them with the intent to decide whether to keep them. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to make a better choice once I read the stories in here. But I think it'll be a very light read, and that's exactly what I'm looking for right now. So with my 2 TBRs combined, this is what we've got to work with right now. Lots, oh, actually two fewer. I almost put my red books back in there. Lots to work with, lots of good stuff. different genres, which is good because sometimes I'll only read fantasy for the longest time. But we've got fantasy, we've got thriller, we've got historical fiction, literary fiction, short stories, lots and lots to choose from. It's a busy time of year in the spring, but I'm hoping I can knock at least half of these out and then maybe just have a really amazing reading year in the summer. The reading slump, I can feel myself slowly leaving, so if you've read anything interesting that you think should be on my radar, let me know. I'm excited to get into these, and I will be back with other videos in the months ahead, but with another video wrapping up what I read in the spring season at the end of May. Okay, I'll see you the next time I see you, and Florence will see you in her next video, and have a good spring. Bye. Why are all my outros so awkward? Oh my god.